All right. Seen a couple of reports about Russia sending nuclear-capable bombers at the invitation of Venezuela. Now, for anybody who's can see view with a woke and clear, objective, contextual thinking, knows that this is quite possibly the closest we will ever get to a apocalyptic, life-ending scenario. I've made videos about the insanity which has been infused in the so-called leadership across the board. It doesn't matter where you live on the planet. The levels of outright clinical insanity is absolutely retarded in the fact that so many people cannot understand understand this is mind-blowing. Let's talk about a few recent things that along in context with what's happening with Russia's putting two nuclear-capable bombers in South America. Now, this is something that the Russia has not done before. The Chinese, and no one who has been the enemy of the West has been capable before, or had the political will before to do this. Now, the thing is as for levels of insanity, the West is by far the most insane. So the Western so-called leadership has been on a downward spiral of levels of insanity that should put them in straitjackets and they should be put in rubber rooms for the safety of us all globally. But that is not what is happening. The Russians have a degree of insanity, but they're not Fruit Loops just yet. And so the move that the Russians have been doing, such as the taking of Crimea, well, that for anybody who has eyes and has a smattering of intelligence and ability to not take the echo chamber and the propaganda, can see that it is the encroachment of NATO, which is a Western military unit, has literally brought military forces onto the borders, onto the western borders of Russia, just like North Korea has faced for so long the same thing in South Korea. The U.S. and the South Koreans who have been the proxy puppets for the U.S. and the West have been doing military drills. It's not military. Understand something. When they say military drills, and all the other crap that they put in. They're basically threatening every single time. Now, I detract and from my focus, and my focus is that there has never been anybody, any nation who has had the political will or the reason, or a very dire reason to take actions that would be seen by the provocateurs of the West as a ramping up of provocation, and that because of the domination of the West through the media and through propaganda is something that has forced the hand of the Russians. Now, the media always pushes Putin, 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 and the thing is I keep making this point. It doesn't matter if you're in the United States, if you're in Russia, China, in Europe, Eastern Europe, in Africa, it doesn't matter. No one man or person has the power to push an agenda without an infrastructure of people with influence to get that agenda accomplished. No one. And nowhere in the world is that insidious, vile agenda more prevalent, with levels of clinical insanity, than the U.S. Now, when I say the U.S., I'm not talking about the U.S. people, because no matter if you're a white supremacist, you most certainly don't want to be. Most certainly don't want to the extinction of all life on the planet. So when I say it's the U.S., when I say it's Russia, when I say it's China, when I say Europeans, I'm talking about the so-called leadership, and the levels of insanity is clinical. So along with the Russian move, which will be seen as a provocation, and even though two bombers don't represent an actual threat, the fact that it is in the U.S. sphere of regional influence, the U.S. will blow it up and to stellar levels and claim, look, Russia, they're there now. They are a threat, imminent threat, and we must do something about it. So don't be fooled, because two warplanes don't count, even if they're nuclear capable. The U.S. has been flying nuclear capable planes in the regions that China and Russia and Iran and all these supposed enemies of the West. The U.S. has been unilaterally and aggressively, along with the West, has been running roughshod all through regions where the U.S. claims and the West claims is the enemy. So, going back to North Korea, I mean, that is a prime example of the U.S. and its proxy allies. It's doing the provocation, flying into North Korea and stuff like that, going into the waters, the regional controlled waters of Iran, going through the straits between with impunity, going into the straits that Crimea and Ukraine, where the Russians have taken Crimea to give them a buffer and an area where they can get early warnings of the very high potential of a hot war. So now you have an extremely high potential of hot war with Russia, and China will come into it. Don't even think for a second that that's not going to happen. China and Russia have a common cause, have a common reason. And right now, the Chinese and the Russians are looking to be more sane on an international level. Maybe not in a domestic level, but in international level, they're seeing more restrained, more responsible and sane. So you have that, and the Chinese building up the islands. You know, the media is constantly pushing that these breaking international law and all that other stuff. But remember, those manufactured islands are in the Chinese region of influence. And for the same reason that Russia took Crimea, all right, China is doing the building so that they can build up a defense. All of this should be utterly alarming to us. And what's happening in Venezuela and in South America in general, and has been taking place for 30 plus years, that all should be alarming because it's all interconnected. You have Bolsonaro, who's in Brazil. And Brazil's a huge country. Brazil's massive. It's not a small country. Land-wise, it's huge. Its population is pretty damn high. There's been the constant propaganda of instability in South America that's been going on. And while there is some instability, it's not as not so unstable as the propaganda machine in the U.S. and the West would like to make it look like. The other thing is Maduro of Venezuela has been giving out arms to every man, woman, and child in Venezuela. And that is because the pressure has become so eminent. The threat and pressure has become so eminent. That is what he has to do. And that's insane. But it's insane because socially, emotionally, and intellectually, this cripples people. It makes a psychopathy that is dangerous, not only to Venezuelans, but to everybody else. But the reason is because Venezuela stands an imminent threat of actual violence, not perpetrated from, not largely perpetrated from the inside, from the outside. So, and the constant attacks on all fronts has made Venezuela make moves, like inviting Russia. And Russia had to take the offer because in hopes of putting some brakes on the West, and particularly in the U.S., and hoping that this move will make them question their evil, insidious agenda. And that is what it is. It's not a declaration of war from Russia. Hell, Russia doesn't have the military capability. North Korea, Iran, China. The only thing Russia has is a shit ton of nuclear weapons, just like the U.S. Both countries are on par with nuclear weapons. Both countries have enough nuclear weapons to virtually crater almost the entire surface of the earth. And nuclear Armageddon, you just need both Russia and the U.S., and they don't even have to use all of their nuclear weapons. And that is the frightening and terrifying reality. So, anyways, going back to what's happening in South America, the U.S. and the West will use the U.S. and the West provocators will use what Russia and Venezuela are doing as a provocation to bolster military forces and send military forces down to into South America. They will bring in their proxies of Brazil and Colombia and others to be geared up and ready to for a hot war in Venezuela. Unfortunately, that is going to trigger several things. One, Russia, who has already sent in 2 bombers, will be forced to either adhere to the token alliance that they've created with Venezuela, or back down. But due to the pressures that's happening by the aggression by the West, in their own regional sphere, and the high potential of a hot war over there, meaning their western borders, Russia will more than likely decide to send a small contingency of military forces. And the reason for this is because if they do, then they have then they have a more easier access to directly attack the U.S. And the U.S. knows this. And that is why they're going to use it. Even though it is the U.S. and the West who are the true provocators, who are the true true vendors for war and destruction. The U.S. knows this, but the U.S. and the U.S. propaganda will go into action to continue to vilify. Now, this is going to cause trouble in the domestic front because the level of people waking up to what's happening, it has gone up significantly high enough that on the domestic front, this could potentially trigger a civil war. So you have all of this going on just in our region, and then add in the fact that the Chinese will probably send forces into South America, and China will ramp up. China and Russia are already ramping. Actually, I can't say ramp up. They're already ramping up their military capabilities because they know that this is almost an imminent possibility of a global World War III. Now, I made a point on a comment from one of the sources that I found out about the two Russian warplanes, is that unlike World War II, where North America largely escaped, or actually no, completely escaped actual fighting and violence and the destruction of infrastructure, this will not be the case in this war, because this will directly bring violence and destruction on a scale that that Europe faced in the Second World War. Make no mistake, we will not come out of this unscathed. But what's even more terrifying is that the likelihood of nuclear Armageddon is almost assured. I'm talking 99% chance. So high that it's virtually it's personally impossible for it not to happen. And why? It's because the level of insanity is rife, absolutely rife, within the so-called leadership. And that is what will trigger it, because it won't be our axis of evil. It won't be our enemies who will trigger a nuclear Armageddon. It will be us. Well, not us, because there is no us. It's the U.S. criminal, insane criminals leadership, supposed leadership, and they will bring about the end, the apocalypse. So understand, all of this is going on, and there are other independent sources, as well as a few such as press and Press TV and a few others who are actually doing journalism. Not to say Press TV doesn't do propaganda on behalf of the of Iran and other Middle Eastern countries, but those are just counters for the propaganda, and they're more objective counters propaganda than the Western. So what we have is military. There's already a massive military buildup happening, and mostly a naval military buildup. But also, you remember that this whole migration thing. The 7,000 or 6,000 migrants coming up from South America. Well, guess what? That, as we just recently found out, was not organic. But what the media is trying to push, and saying it's from the left, and in the left, when they talk about the left, they're talking about the democratic so-called democratic leadership, and the so-called leftist propaganda media. That would be your mainstream propaganda, not the independent. Largely not the independent. Most certainly not and it's most certainly not the true left, which is the progressive. So, but we get this report that this whole thing has been fabricated, engineered, and Trump has sent down 6,000 troops. Now there's talk about arming troops, and it's talk about doing away with it, that comitatus law, which states that U.S. military can't take place of U.S. law enforcement. But there's a push to get rid of that. So understand, the U.S. is already putting troops on the southern borders. Why? Because the U.S. is already planning. They're already pushing. All of this interconnects, and with the domestic policies of the U.S. and the domestic policies of the Europeans, and, everybody gives a lot of credit to the UN, but here's the problem. The UN has actually some good people who actually do some great work, but they have they have absolutely no impacts. Why? Because the leadership, the appointed leadership of the West, which controls the UN, the UN is an agency of the West. The World Trade Organization is an agency of the West. The IMF is an agency of the West. So every international so-called institution is controlled by the West. But it's not for the majority of the Western citizens. It is for the criminally insane and the so-called leaderships of the West. These insane criminals are so concerned about garnering power and wealth, and thereby influence and control, that they are cannot see anything but that. And if we in the West were woke and intelligent enough and clear-eyed enough, we would arrest all of them. And when I say all of them, I'm talking about the so-called political leadership, and the corporate and oligarchy of the rich, like the Koch brothers, Mercers, DeVosses, the Soroses. And you know what? I view Soros in that level of insanity, because while he may do things by spending money which is ill-gotten in the first place, because he helped to push legislation and policies that allowed him to do as he has done. He has upheld a system based on illegalities that gave him an advantage so that he could continue. So Soros, in my book, is in the same place as the Betsy DeVosses, as the Rothschilds, as all of them. You know, I've been using the term robber barons. And interestingly enough, Professor Richard Wolff used the same term. He's a Marxist economist. He's been an economist all his life. And I'm starting to hear from others using the term criminals and criminality. You have Ralph Nader, who did a phenomenal piece about how all these illegalities were pushed by those with outrageous wealth. Those who used the outrageous, ill-gotten gains to get control of media, to get control of politicians, to get control of influence through institutions and building up institutions and putting and getting influence with academics and and building up of pseudo academics. This is the level of unreal insanity. So remember, all of this is interconnected. All of this is pushing for World War III. And why? Because a World War III will increase their material gains. And that is the level of insanity. Now, right now, they may not believe, and they may even say that they don't want, that they would never use nuclear weapons. But remember, they've already used the atomic bomb. Not once, but twice. And the West has been testing thousands. And when I say thousands, I'm talking thousands. And I'm not just talking about when I say the West, I'm talking about all of Europe, all of Europe, including Israel, which is part of the West, and the United States. But they all those nuclear capable so-called nations have been testing thermonuclear weapons for decades upon decades upon decades. How insane is that? So you have all this going on, and not to say that the Russians and the North Koreans and others who have nuclear weapons, and China haven't done their own tests, but comparably to the West, the criminals of the West They're a drop in the bucket. But it really doesn't. That's really a misnomer, because testing of any weapons that have the cumulative effects of doing unspeakable damage, even if you just do one test that will stick around for generations, that's insane. They have neutron bombs now. And neutron bombs, holy God. So we not only have to worry about thermonuclear weapons, we have to worry about neutron bombs. Anybody know what a neutron bomb will do? Well, supposedly the propaganda is that it won't have it won't have the nuclear fallout, but a neutron detonation, if you know anything about astronomical phenomena, produces high levels of gamma radiation. Insane levels. Now, the propaganda they're pushing out is that, there won't be nuclear fallout. Well, yeah, probably, maybe that's the case. But gamma ray bursts? Seriously? It's insane that we use X-rays, and that's a low-level form of gamma radiation. But a gamma ray burst, it's what happens when there's a neutron when a neutron star goes. That travels. It can travel. It can travel thousands of light years. And if you're caught into a gamma ray burst, guess what happens? It destroys everything. You die. You die instantly. You won't feel any pain. But you're basically, that's it. Be like turning. Think about it. Kind of like. You see a movie or something where somebody gets hit with some sort of energy and they just like melt away. Well, it's not really that, because what it does is it basically will. I can't think of the correct way, but it's an incredibly dangerous thing, and you do not want a gamma ray burst on a living ecosystem. That's the level of insanity is beyond insane. So understand this. This is all gearing up for World War III. And we will not get away unscathed. And the big question, but more than likely scenario, is that extinction of all life will happen. So, so bend over, kiss your ass goodbye. Say your farewells to your loved ones and your friends, because that is what's coming, and it is not in the distant future. It's not even a decade away. It will come, and it will come in our lifetime. Even if you're in your 50s or your 60s, If your health is good and you're in your 80s, you're gonna see it. You're gonna see it, and we're gonna all pay for it. Why? Because we have the insane asylum masquerading as representative leadership, who has an insane criminal ideology that will kill us all. And even if you were to take a more rosier look at it, the devastation that will happen, combined with what's already happening with climate change, and the devastation that it's already causing us, and even if we don't use nuclear weapons and only use conventional weapons, which includes depleted uranium shells, which includes devastating chemical weapons, and so on and so forth. And don't make no mistake, the U.S. and the West do have chemical weapons, and they have used them, and they still continue to use them. But even just using conventional weapons, this is going to cause a level of ecological breakdown and devastation. And compound that with climate change, and even having a conventional war will put a huge question on the future of life on the planet. Planet will be just fine. It's not going anywhere, but life, all life, will have a huge question mark on it. So prepare yourself. That's what's coming. Although most of you won't see this video, and there may be a couple that will, but guess what? That's another form of insanity. Is that all people like myself, and all those others who are trying to inform you and have you do the critical thinking and have you view things in reality and not illusion and fantasy, we won't be heard. And perhaps if we get through and my projections for nuclear Armageddon, or just conventional Armageddon, with the factors I've spoken about, and we get through, and there are some of us still alive, and by some miracle, enough infrastructure stays around so that this video I'm making can be seen. Perhaps people will start looking at things differently and start really taking an active role in making sure that we stay informed, educated, and woke, so that this will never happen again. I keep talking. Just because we physically age and we go through the years does not make us adults. There are examples of children who are more clear-eyed, such as this 15-year-old girl in Sweden who started her own little protest, sitting in front of the Swedish Parliament for weeks upon weeks upon weeks, and she's actually gotten so famous that she's bringing other children. You have the Sunrise Movement. You have the kids that went out that left school to go protest for gun regulations and safety and so on and so forth. These are examples of supposed children acting with what should be real adult thinking and real adult actions. Because right now, I'm not seeing many adults. My sister got offended with that, and she was saying, "Oh, you can't talk." My father gets offended with that sort of thing. But the thing is if what is that saying? If the shoe fits, wear it. Well, that's exactly what it is. We have people who are in their supposedly 70s and 80s and so on and so forth, and 50s and 60s, and they're talking insane, childish tantrums, who are so self-absorbed, who are so insane, who are so narcissistic that they can't understand the imminent threat that they face, not by black people or minorities, but by the very insane people that they put their faith behind for the very system that is destroying not just the economy and the environment, but our actual minds. And I made this comment. There's only one trickle down form. We all know about the trickle down economics theory. Well, guess what? There is a trickle down thing that has worked, and that is the trickle down effects of insanity. And that is the only trickle down that has actually done its work. It's insidious, vile, evil work.